Hands up, who sometimes gets overwhelmed by the stresses of life? Yes, me too. What do you do to take things down a notch? Nature? Exercise? Carbs? There's been more research lately into a technique called tapping, or more formally, emotional freedom techniques. It uses acupuncture points and other psychological tools to reduce stress. Erica Voles took a look.
How would you teach me?
So the first thing I'd say is I don't need to know anything about the detail as long as you can think about it in your mind. That makes it quite safe if someone doesn't want to tell me too much about it. But I would say, Erica, so just think about that for a moment in your mind.
Okay, just to back up a bit, I'm getting a lesson in how to do emotional freedom techniques, more commonly known as tapping. My guide, Dr. Peter Stapleton, has just asked me to think of a stressful moment. And I have. It's private. I've rated it about 8.5 out of 10.
And the next thing I'd say is take two fingers, probably your dominant hand, so your, middle finger and your first finger, and tap on the opposite hand on the fleshy part under your little finger. And I would get you to tap there and just repeat after me. Even though when I think about what happened, I still feel really stressed.
I still feel really stressed. And I do. I feel it in my gut. I can feel it.
Good. I'm going to add that in now. Just say, I accept I feel this way.
I accept that I feel this way.
Even though when I think about what happened, I still feel really stressed. Hi, I'm Dr. Peter Stapleton, Associate Professor in the School of Psychology at Bond University. As a clinical and health psychologist, I like to research evidence-based but particularly innovative stress reduction techniques. So EFT, emotional freedom techniques, we often call tapping because it describes the actual act of what we're doing with this technique, which in its essence is stimulating or tapping on acupuncture points that are on the face and the body. And really what EFT is a way to reduce stress, not just physically but emotionally. So it's a stress reduction technique.
Where did it come from?
Yeah, so it has now, in its current form, been around for about 45 years. It came out of the self-help field, and the particular originator had been looking at things like traditional Chinese acupuncture and ways that perhaps stress was reduced in the body. Of course, that field has been around for hundreds of years, so what it's borrowing on out of acupuncture has certainly been around for a long time. What we've seen in the last 2 decades is it emerging and coming into the academic world and being tested in clinical trials. We do acknowledge exactly what's going on for us when we do the tapping technique. So that would be saying out loud our distress or the problem that we want to change. So that makes it a little bit different. We know as soon as you do that, the stress center in the brain engages. So the amygdala will engage when somebody becomes quite mindful to what is happening for them, whether that's an emotional stress or a physical pain or whatever it is. That stress center in the brain engages.
When you then tap and kind of acknowledge that feeling, what's happening then?
So the research to date has been able to show that as that amygdala is engaging, when someone stimulates those pressure points with a tapping technique, 2 fingers, and actually continues to stay focused, the activity in the amygdala becomes less active. So that is why people will then say, I feel calmer after tapping, or they might find that the problem they were worrying about no longer seems so intense to them. So we know that the neural pathways back from the acupuncture points to the brain are definitely there, and we can see that through MRI studies, EEG studies, those types of things that show the amygdala will become quieter.
What does research tell us about the effectiveness of tapping as a stress reduction technique?
Yes, so we now have, at last count, over 300 published clinical trials across peer-reviewed academic journals in a range of different areas. But the research is quite solid in that it is showing the effect of tapping absolutely not only reduces stress, perhaps has an impact on things like diagnosis, but it's having a far-reaching biochemistry effect on people. So lots of studies have actually shown the stress hormone cortisol reduces after tapping. It's also shown that EEG activity in the brain can become quieter after tapping.
Peter Stapleton says tapping has been used in a range of settings. In Australia, for instance, it's been used in relation to weight loss and food cravings. In fact, Peta herself initially checked out the technique while dealing with her own food cravings.
I'm going to share with everybody, it was on chocolate. So I went to a training. I dragged myself to a training because I was still a little bit skeptical. And of course, they brought out a block of chocolate and said, right, we'll show you how it works for food cravings, not knowing that would then spark my career in research. And I was the last man standing, Erica. I was hanging on to that chocolate and it was dripping down my arm. And I was still tapping and I thought, okay, I won't give up. And it only took a few more rounds of tapping. And to this day, 18 years later, I can walk away from chocolate.
So they asked you to hold the chocolate and kind of think about the craving?
And even lick it and taste it. And that is what we do in our food craving trials. We actually do have the food. So there you go.
In the United States, there have been promising studies around the use of tapping with veterans of the armed services who have PTSD and other issues. Veterans Affairs, VA, has started some small steps towards including tapping in their programs.
I signed up to go to these wars and do exciting things, but I actually got injured in Irvine, California at a training exercise.
One veteran who's tried tapping is Kathy Stickle. It all started when a traumatic brain injury basically took over Kathy's life.
We were doing rappelling, and I had decided to rappel head first, and the person who was holding the brake rope on the ground wasn't watching. So when I leaped out and people screamed, which was the desired effect, he thought something terrible was happening, and he ran with the rope and swung me into the wall head first, and it cracked my Kevlar helmet. And I knew I was kind of shaken up, but I didn't know I was damaged. And maybe an hour and a half later, I couldn't talk. Like I tried to say, I need help. I need help. And I couldn't talk. And your margin for tolerance, frustration tolerance gets down to just nothing. And it's not a life. And when I finally got referred to a neurologist, he listened to me for just a few minutes. He said, wait a minute, did you hit your head? And I had not even remembered that it had happened. And just walking back through time, I thought, wait. If this accident that I'm suddenly remembering, if that really happened, these people would have been there. And I called them on the phone and I said, hey, was there a rappelling accident? And they said, what do you mean, was there a rappelling accident? Stickle, we thought you were dead.
Eventually, Kathy's problems got so bad, she was taken into the VA by a concerned loved one.
A lot of people like myself, I had to get dragged into urgent care mental health. It's basically an emergency room for mental health problems. You're suicidal or you're angry, you're just causing problems. So I actually got dragged in there by a family member.
At the VA, Kathy was taught how to use breathing and other techniques to regulate her emotions. She also learnt about tapping. Then a friend and veteran, Laurie Michaels, who is also a counsellor, asked her to join a pilot tapping program for veterans.
So my friend Laurie was, she was doing this tapping, and then she's telling us, tap the top of your head, now you're tapping, and you just follow her, you're tapping above your eyebrow, you're tapping the side of your eyes, and I'm just kind of going along with it to be a nice guy. And then someone will bring something up. It can be something about their dog, about their cat, about their kitchen, about their child, but they're talking about how they're feeling. And it is a liberation. You'll just feel like this sort of uncoiling within the body of your own body's trained very unhelpful responses to stressful thoughts or frustration. And my goodness, by the second one, I was a believer. And it's non-chemical and it's low cost, and you can do it from anywhere. It's remarkably accessible.
Coming back to this continent, the Australian Psychological Society says that while studies on tapping, quote, demonstrate the efficacy of emotional freedom techniques as a self-help therapeutic method, the APS stresses that some approaches, if taken without appropriate professional support from a qualified psychologist, can make things worse, not better. They add that While the APS is not at this stage in a position to endorse the widespread use of EFT, they welcome further research. And the APS says that the next review of its manual on evidence-based psychological interventions will consider a review of EFT-related evidence. Is there any kind of harm in people trying it without a psychologist or without someone trained in tapping?
No, not really. The only thing that tends to happen when somebody might watch a video, my own included, is they may actually tune into, if you like, something that's a bit deeper that's in there. And often if that results in any level of distress coming up, people might then think tapping doesn't work. And what we try to let people know is it absolutely has worked in that moment. If that was to happen by watching a random video, that's when we do suggest, hey, go off and actually get support, work through this, rather than just tapping along and, the wheels fall off watching a video because something comes up for you that you weren't aware was there.
It does have to be said that not all psychologists and mental health professionals feel tapping is a technique that is worthwhile, that is evidence-based. In fact, some seem very opposed to it. And I guess it's good to be sceptical until something has been proven unequivocally. What is your response to the level of opposition that tapping EFT does tend to face?
Yeah, and I absolutely agree that, for us in the scientific world, it is useful to kind of have that skeptical hat on until we're sort of, happy with the evidence that's out there and that these research trials have actually been watertight and things like that. I do think because tapping has been around for many, many decades now, the early understandings of how tapping worked and what people might have sort of learnt about it have stuck with people. And I do think that we probably have to encourage people to just revisit the research and the evidence, over 300 clinical trials now, which is a very different story to what it was 40, 50 years ago. And sometimes that might just be needed so that people kind of revisit it and think, okay, well, that's not what I heard 40 years ago. I didn't realise the field had come this far, and the theories behind why it works and things like that are now obviously published in peer-reviewed journals.
In fact, Peter Stapleton is currently undertaking an evidence-based review of tapping for the APA, the American Psychological Association.
Yeah, so the APA just at the end of 2021 gave my team, so it's an international team, we are now investigating and evaluating tapping for trauma and PTSD for the APA, and the view is for it to be listed on their evidence-based website. So this is the first time in EFT's history that evaluation is being done, so we are in the thick of that at the moment. Our local bodies like our Australian Psychological Society and Medicare will look to that outcome. Now I'm going to walk you through the 8 acupuncture points that we focus on. And as we do that, we're only just going to say 1 or 2 words. So the first one is the start of your eyebrow. Tap there with 2 fingers and just say, I still feel stressed.
I still feel stressed.
The next one's the side of
When
your
I tried tapping, the first round had a modest impact in reducing my levels of stress. I think it brought things down to about a 7.
The next one is under your eye, just on the bone, tapping there and saying, I can feel it in my gut.
I can feel it in my gut.
Under your nose, tapping there and saying, I can feel this stress in my gut.
I can feel this stress in my gut. But I could definitely feel things shifting. Peter says that sometimes it will require more sessions, but sometimes not.
Obviously, for different conditions, we've got established evidence and clinical guidelines over something like PTSD, definitely have 10 sessions, things like that. But even phobias, different physical illness, there's lots of 1-session clinical papers that are published showing that people never needed any more tapping after one single 50-minute session.
And what's Kathy Stickles' life like now? Well, Kathy says she needs to do a range of things to keep on top of her emotional regulation, including meditation first thing. But Kathy says that tapping has had a real impact on her quality of life. So it's an important tool in her mental health toolbox.
In that moment where you say, my life isn't working, I'm willing to hear what anyone has to say. So now what I'll do is, yes, if I hear that, now I know, hey, look, those back muscles in the middle of my back, they're tightening up. Oh, hey, my heart rate is speeding up. Oh, I'm starting into that mechanism, and I'll just step away. I'll do my breathing that the VA taught me. I'll do the tapping that I learned in this last year and a half. And it doesn't have to be you're tapping on the top of your head and on the sides of your eyes. I've learned that even just putting a hand in a pocket and tapping to that leg, putting a hand around my wrist and just kind of squeezing with that thumb, then we're unhitching it from those habitual, very unhelpful patterns of emotional regulation. I feel like I can steer the car. It doesn't mean I don't have problems, but it does mean I don't keep surprising myself every moment of the day.
Veteran Kathy Stickle ending that look at tapping by Erica Voles. As always, there's more info on our guests on the Life Matters homepage. And this might surprise you. Kathy took herself to Europe